Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Fiscal Matters, a platform where the Financial and Fiscal Commission simplifies fiscal issues so that you at home can be able to understand quite complex issues that are part of our intergovernmental fiscal relations system. So today we are discussing the legislative process where in Parliament they pass various laws and then these laws become part of our reality. We today are talking about the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act. This is a law that is being proposed by the Minister of Basic Education. She introduced this law last year in Parliament. The intention of this law is to make some changes into the current National Schools Act, and also to make changes in the way that teachers are employed. So as the Financial and Fiscal Commission, one of our key mandates is to comment on envisaged legislation to see if this legislation is going to be cost effective for the state and that we can be able to fund the changes. And so today I have the pleasure of being joined by one of our experts at the FFC, a researcher who has done quite extensive work on basic education, and she's going to now have a discussion on what are we thinking as the FFC when it comes to the Basic Education Laws and Amendment Act. So I would like to introduce Ms. Sasha Peters. Welcome, Sasha, to Fiscal Matters.
Thank you, Dr. Mbaba. Good to be here.
Thank you so much, Sasha. Sasha, so we know that the Minister of Basic Education has introduced this piece of law. It's still a bill, and it has gone through National Assembly, and now it is with NCOP. Just enlighten us, what is this Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill? What is it about? What does it seek to achieve from what you can see?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Mbaba. So the BELA Bill, as it's commonly referred to now, is about making amendments to some key pieces of legislation, as you indicated in your opening, specifically the South African Schools Act and the Educators Employment Act. But I think the big change is with respect to the South African Schools Act, where with this amendment, the definition of what comprises basic education will be expanded to include grade R. So up until now, or well, still currently, basic education is considered to encompass grade or to start at grade 1 up until grade 12, your matric year. But if this amendments are passed, then your basic education will start at grade R up until the matric year. And that's very important because access to early childhood education, which is what grade R is all about, is critical to the future success of learners later on, throughout the education pipeline.
Right.
So firstly, it expands that definition of basic education, and then importantly, it makes attendance of grade R compulsory. It actually criminalizes, the act of preventing learners from attending grade R now. So those there are other amendments to the bill, like it specifies that corporal punishment is outlawed. There are some other proposed amendments to the management of schools, particularly with respect to the powers and functions of school governing bodies. There's a bit more regulation to homeschooling. So it's a raft of different amendments. But I think for the FFC, the very important amendments being proposed relate to that expansion of the definition of basic education and making it compulsory. Because when you do that, when you make it compulsory, it sort of broadens the legal mandate and scope of the department, and then there are then costs associated with that.
Yes. So then it makes grade R compulsory. So as a parent, you would have no choice but to actually send your child to grade R. Because in my understanding right now, there are many disparities in the way that grade R is presented or served, or people engage with grade R. Some parents have more resources for their children for grade R, and some parents for grade R is just playtime. And when the kids get to grade 1, some kids still have not really learned that much. So now when we say now grade R is going to be compulsory, do you think that will actually have an impact on outcomes of basic education?
So there's lots of international as well as national research on how access to ECD, especially grade R, how it can positively affect outcomes. But the key is about the quality of ECD education that you receive. So I mean, we obviously it's a great thing, and we welcome the inclusion or the integration of grade R now into the formal basic education sector. But the emphasis now must be on delivering quality ECD education.
We also know, Sasha, that there are many ECD centers which are not funded properly. So now if this law becomes compulsory for grade R to be offered, what about those unfunded or poorly funded ECD centers? Does that mean that now where grade R is being offered will be in a formal schooling environment, or can any service provider have their own grade R which is accredited, but they still must find funding?
So mostly grade R is offered at your public ordinary schools, at the schools that primary schools. But they are also offered at ECD centers.
Yes.
So in the case of where it's offered in a public ordinary school, there is funding via the provincial education budget for that. Then with respect to the grade R's that's offered at your ECD centers, government does provide a subsidy to those ECD centers.
Yeah.
But I think as South Africa, we've had success with improving access to grade R. It's that other earlier part of the ECD pipeline, like your children from 0 to 4, where that very big gap that you're speaking about exists.
Yes.
And also where that big funding gap exists.
Yeah. So what about parents who have grade R at home, like who do homeschooling, who have never taken their child to a formal school? How will this affect them, this law, if it's now compulsory?
So now, because of the greater regulation of homeschooling, they would have to get approval to do homeschooling. Yeah.
Sure.
So it's you apply to the head of the department at your provincial education department. They then do an assessment of whether there are various criteria that you have to meet. And if they approve it, then you would be allowed to do homeschooling. But there are also now additional costs involved, because parents will have to source an assessor, an educational assessor, that will, at the end of each phase of education, that person will come in and sort of verify that the learner is at the stage where they should be.
Yes.
it's not necessarily a bad thing, because I mean, we our intention is to provide quality education to all children.
Yes.
And so even homeschooling, there needs to be
Yeah.
it needs to be monitored to see that learners are on par.
Yes.
But now it introduces a cost for the
Yeah.
for the household.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I don't want to belabor too much the grade R aspect of the act as the bill before it becomes an act. So an act becomes a bill, and then it becomes an act. So it's a bill now.
Yes.
So now it's still a bill. Now I'm saying I don't want to belabor too much the grade R, but I'm reminded of the fact that we have many undocumented children out there in the streets. There are many undocumented children who you'll find at the red robots standing there. Some of them are not even South African. We don't know how they got here, but they are here anyway. Does the law or this act speaks to those children? Have you come across any of those inklings as to say, how would we deal with this now if it's become compulsory? Because you would not want to see any child now during school hours who should be at school loitering around.
Yeah. If I recall that in the combing through the proposed amendments.
Yes.
That, when you go and apply for your child to attend school,
Yes.
there are these required documents,
Yeah.
like the certificate that outlines the
Yeah.
different vaccinations.
Yes.
and those sorts of things. And previously, when you didn't provide that, then you wouldn't be, your child would not be considered. But there is a clause now in the amendment bill that says that the learner can be admitted, and the caregiver would be given time to sort of source those documents. So I'm not too sure how that then relates to non-South
Africans one.
Yeah.
Yes, I
Yeah.
think that's something probably is going to come up as part of the interrogation of this act.
Yes.
So as the Financial and Fiscal Commission, then we also advise provinces, right? We advise provincial governments in terms of the provincial equitable share, and also on the formula of how much they should be getting. So now this act has an impact now, or this, when it becomes an act, it will have an impact at a provincial level as to how they fund basic education. So now what do you foresee as the role of the provinces when it comes to BELA?
So, Chair, Dr. Mbava, the provinces, as you say, they are at the coalface. They are responsible for implementing basic education.
Yes.
So now we're going to see if the amendments are passed and there's grade R becomes compulsory, there'll be an increase in the number of learners.
Yes.
And that will obviously have a knock-on effect in terms of the educational inputs that will be required. So provinces are going to require more ECD educators. So the department has done an assessment of the cost associated with that, and it's around 5 billion rand that they require. And that is based on two assumptions. Firstly, that your ECD educators, their salary levels need to be equalized with educators that are in the basic education sector already. So, it's been, there are many articles on, the fact that ECD educators receive a, not very competitive salary relative to your primary or high school teachers. So there need to be that equalization process first. Then besides that, we also need additional teachers. So that's where that 5 billion comes from, that estimate. But I think as the FFC, what we are concerned about is that estimate doesn't include your cost of living adjustment. So, I mean, we've seen with various division of revenue bills, we've seen how the wage agreements and the cost of living adjustments, how it has a fiscus-wide sort of impact. So even that 5 billion, one would say, is a conservative estimate. You know, because we know there will be these wage negotiations, and there are likely to be, you know, some agreements reached in terms of perhaps inflation-linked increases and the like.
Yes, yeah.
So that's the obvious or big input that we'll need there, and where the cost arises is on your cost of employment. And the second one relates to infrastructure. So there'll be a greater number of learners. You're going to need more classrooms. So the Department of Basic Education is estimating that we'll need about 12 billion to provide new classrooms for the anticipated increase in numbers. So, and that is meant to come from existing funding instruments that are in the basic education sector, like your education infrastructure grant, your grant that funds the ASIDI program, your school's infrastructure backlogs grant. Now, our problem there is that these are instruments of pockets of funding that are already under such pressure.
Yes, yes.
Now we're adding more on top of that.
Yes.
And you know, the Auditor General has also raised in their assessment of the basic education sector the poor quality of education infrastructure. So, you know, we're going to definitely need more and new money into the sector, but we're going to need such close or strong oversight and monitoring to ensure that, you know, if we're going to pump more money in, that we actually produce infrastructure that will, you know, enhance the learning environment that these young kids will be in.
So if we're going to need more money, already we are actually spending more money in servicing our debt as a country. If we look at the stats, we'll see that as a country we spend more money servicing our debt, and that money actually exceed the budget of the police, health, even basic education. Isn't that a concern?
It's a very big concern, Dr. Mbava, and I mean, I think the FFC has been very vocal on that.
Yeah.
You know, because this big this mountain of debt actually just prevents us from being able to fulfill the socioeconomic rights that are so integral to you know, our constitution and Bill of Rights. So what usually occurs is that we see reprioritization occurring, and inevitably there are winners and losers.
Right.
But if we are going to implement this bill, and if we are going to see any you know, reap those positive benefits that are definitely possible when you now start seriously focusing on ECD, we need to know that the funding is there. So this bill, there are costs there, but we need to know, you know, is the money there to fund it?
Right. And then talk to us about the education qualifications of the grade R teachers, because I think that's important. From your understanding, are the grade R teachers also part of the South African Council of Educators? Are they actually accredited to teach at that level?
So from some of the work that we've done, we see that most of the ECD educators are underqualified. The ones that are in your public ordinary schools are more likely to be your to have the required minimum qualification.
Right. This legislation now to say that it's compulsory. Now, are they, those teachers who are less qualified, will they be forced now to upskill themselves, or will their ECD centers be disqualified from offering grade R?
I don't think they'll be disqualified from offering it.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think because then we all we all lose out then the learners,
yes.
but there definitely is a move to upskill them.
Right.
And if when I was going through the provincial education budgets under the ECD program, there's actually a line item, a sub-program that speaks to human resource development. So one would hope that there are sufficient funds available to make an impact in terms of the qualification of your
yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. Now we know that in across the provinces, the 9 provinces, some of these provinces are very dense in terms of the population. There are more people. Some of these provinces, we've seen that schools have been rationalized and closed because there are lesser people there, like rural areas. So now, does this mean that provinces which are densely populated are going to actually carry more costs? Because now probably there are more kids there in those provinces who are at grade R level than rural areas. Is that something we can expect, or there won't be any material differences between the provinces given their demographics?
I think that so basic education, the major funding for basic education is through the provincial equitable share allocation.
Right.
And that allocation is based on your learner population. So it would be based on the number. It would need to sort of incorporate the fact that number of learners are then increasing. So we would anticipate seeing that greater funds go to where learners are located.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what we know then is that there are cost implications for this BELA Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill if it becomes law.
Yes.
There are actually cost implications. Now let's talk about the power in terms of governance. We know that at school we have school governing bodies, and then we have the minister, and then you have the parents as well. We have a say in the education of their children. So does this law change any of those dynamics? Does the minister still remains the ones who can make strong decisions with regards to how schools are governed, or does the school governing bodies now given more powers, or do parents and principals and teachers also have more powers? What happens there in terms of who runs the schools and who decides what happens to the child?
So I think that up until now, our school governing bodies have played a sort of dominant role in management of schools in terms of your admissions and language policy. But this bill actually proposes amendments to those types of policies that have been the domain of your school governing bodies. And what it proposes is that the language and admission policies of schools must be approved by the head of department within that province. So it also means more work for your provincial education departments, because they will now have to receive those policies of the schools, assess them, and then either approve or make recommendations for amendments, etc.
Yes. Yeah.
And then also in terms of the language policy, or number of languages of instruction at a school, a head of department in a province can also make a recommendation that you should offer instruction in an additional language. The amendments, however, do say that if such a decision is taken, then it's the onus is on the Provincial Department of Education to ensure that there are resources to do that.
Right.
So there is a bit of diluting some of the powers of your school governing body, definitely. Yes. with this amendment bill, and that has been the source of the pushback from civil society and various other quarters, on this bill.
So based on what we think as the FFC, do we think that this bill is a good thing? Is it going to improve the educational outcomes? Do we support it as the commission, or do we have misgivings? When we go out there to give advice, is it all thumbs up or yes, but we must look at this or that?
I think we would agree with the spirit of the proposed amendments, and definitely the integrating your early learning interventions in that basic education, that continuum of basic education. Previously, it was very disjointed. Your ECD sat with another department. So now there's such a big opportunity now to really make a difference and focus on early learning interventions, and hopefully that will have that domino effect in terms of learning outcomes.
Yes.
So definitely in respect of that proposed amendment, we would embrace it, but we do caution that given our current fiscal environment, we need to be sure that there's realistic costing has been done, that we haven't left out, now we approve it and then we suddenly see, oh, it's going to cost so much more. So for example, as the FF, what we've noted in our analysis is that the bill doesn't talk about learner-teacher support material. It doesn't talk about age-appropriate ablution facilities. It doesn't talk about the increases you'll need in the national, the NSNP, the National Schools Nutrition. Those daily meals that are given to learners in your quintiles 1, 2, and 3 in your poorest schools. So there are gaps in terms of the costing. It could be much more precise, which would enable better planning.
Yes.
But so we just would point out those sorts of gaps where we can tighten up the analysis and then the planning to ensure that we actually marshal the right amount of resources together. But definitely in terms of the intent, yes, we would definitely support it.
Well, there you have it. So now at home you will hear more about the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act that is being proposed by the Minister of Basic Education. So our expert, Ms. Sasha Peters, she has explained what this bill intends to achieve, and that now all parents will be compelled to actually send their children to grade R. But government must also ensure that there are facilities for grade R, there are teachers who are qualified for grade R, and that there is infrastructure, there are schools to actually receive these children. But the objective of all this intervention is to ensure that as a country, as South Africa, we have excellent educational outcomes. Thank you so much again for joining us, and see you again.